Hey everybody, this is Anne and welcome back to Painting Big. Here we have our $2 video for the month of April. I'm going to do some chainmail today. We're going to use a big model, but these techniques are also applicable on 28mm. And we're going to be using metallics, although these are also the same techniques you'd use with TMM on chainmail. So we're going to do some kind of a crossover. All right, let's get to it. Alrighty, so this is our gigantic. She's actually quite gigantic, as you can see. My torso. She's from Ritual Casting. She's the ice queen lady. So you have two ways you can start metallics, folks. You can start with a dark base coat and apply dry brushing over the top of it, or side brushing, as I'm going to probably be doing. Or you can do that dark base coat and apply a very light silver coat, in this case, true silver, 9207, which is actually a silver I like to start with in general. It's one of my more favorite silvers, so we can start with this. I like to start light if I'm going to be doing metallic paint. I think it's a lot easier to get washes on and shade down and add shadows, as opposed to trying to get it to go lighter and lighter, and build it up, especially when you're doing something that is more smooth like a shoulder pad. It's really hard to layer with metallics and to get a smooth blend, so it's often easier to just go down, to start really bright and go down. We'll do it the opposite way here on her hip though. Now, as I stated, this is going to be very similar to how I would tackle chainmail on a 28mm. You're likewise going to have sculpted detail. You're going to have, like in the case of a loincloth or something hanging off of an arm, you're going to have some folds. So, you can use these same techniques. All right, so let us just dive right in. I'm going to grab a brush that's a little bit... I could use a flat for this, but I think I'm going to start with more just kind of a rounded tip. It's actually a brush that had its tip destroyed, but you don't want a brush with a real pointy tip, usually. So it's not got a great tip, and the good thing about that is that it's not going to be tempted to go down in the cracks quite so much. I can do a side brush thing with it. So I'm going to get some metallic on my brush, and this is exactly how I would do this if I were doing it, like I said, on a 28mm. I'd just be working with the texture. So I'm going to grab some of this, and then I'm going to take my palette, and I'm going to actually go back and forth with it. So turn 180 degrees, turn 180 degrees, turn, until it makes kind of a paddle where it has a flat end and a narrow end. See that? You're going to be using the big flat end. And you want to kind of test it a little bit, just like with any dry brush, quote unquote, technique. Make sure you take some of your paint off and very gently start brushing it over the surface. So as you can notice, this isn't really as crazy as they teach you to dry brush in some other applications. I'm using a very purposeful stroke. I'm being precise about it. And that is quite different from the whole, going back and forth crazy and wreck your brush kind of dry brushing. I would call this more side brushing. Normally I would use the side of the brush for this, but since I made my paddle, I don't have to worry as much about using the side of the brush. I just need to make sure there isn't a lot of paint on my brush, because if I did have a lot of paint on my brush, it would flow down into these cracks. Now, if it does flow into the cracks a little bit, don't fret. You can always go back and just touch it up with your dark gray or black or whatever you started with. In my case, I started with carbon gray. That's 9318, which is a very dark charcoal gray, which I'm getting to like a lot for undercoating steel metallic. And once we get a little less paint on our brush, we can start to look more like we're dry brushing. We can go a little faster. But I don't want to wreck this brush outright, so I'm not going to go to the point where my paint is really dry on the brush. I'm going to try to keep it somewhat wet. When it starts to go really tacky, that's when I'm like, all right, I need to reload it, or I need to rinse it out and reload it. So, and here we're just going to concentrate. There's a little fold here. We want to catch the upper side of that fold. We're losing out in some of we'll keep your cracks if you can, like the creases between your, the creases and folds, you should try to keep them. But don't worry if you end up doing a silver over a lot of it and you miss them a lot. You can see them a little bit on this when you're looking top down, but down in person, it's a lot harder to see these folds, but that's okay. We're going to be using finishing techniques on this. That's a lot like the silver pad up here. And really, the only difference is usually how dark or how light you want it to look. But they do come out very similar to each other in the end. as far as depending on how many highlights you put on it. Like, we could go pretty heavy with the highlights on this chainmail that I'm doing right now, and it would end up looking, you know, more like this one. But because you're starting with a darker base coat, it's probably going to end up looking a little darker. We'll see though. So, all right, we've got our first step down on our chainmail here. And like I said, again, if you were doing this on a 28mm, you're probably starting with a dark gray or black base coat, and you're just going to brush your silver over the top. But we're not done yet. This is the easy mode. Like, you could stop here, right? This is where everybody stops. No, it's not where everybody stops. Not me. So up here, if you started with a silver all over the place, then you're going to grab a black wash or a dark gray wash, and you are going to apply it over the surface because you need to get those details outlined like you did down here. And some people just prefer to do it this way. It's a lot less work. I mean, you can see how fast I'm doing it. It's not nearly as much work as like doing all that dry brushing, right? So that sets out. Now, this is going to take a while to set. I probably should have done this one first, right? Watch, I have to cut like a 10 minutes of drying time out of my my video. But look at how close this looks now. Like, really, you can't tell the difference. Now, this wash is going to dry a little bit lighter because paint washes always dry a little lighter than they look wet. But in general, it's very similar. What you may notice is that more detail is kept down here for now from the dry brushing, and maybe a little bit more detail got filled in up here, but that could also have been just the 3D print. So the next step is adding extra shading, and you can add extra shading with a lot of different colors. Colors, you say, why on earth would I use colors for this? Why not just keep using black? Because you can make it look a lot more interesting if you add colors. Like if you wanted to go for something dirty or rusted, then you want to go for some browns. So I've got like brown liner here, and I've got this russet brown. So if we mix those, we make kind of a nice dirt color. So let's say we want to do that. Let's say we want to like say that she's been out in the field a lot and her chainmail is really beat up, and we want to introduce some dirty kind of colors to it. So that's where we start, just painting on these washes. And they are washes. They're mixed up just the same with this. This, by the way, the black wash, 1 drop black paint, 4 drops water, 4 drops brush on sealer, 9107. That's how I made that to get this particular color. All right, so we take this brown wash and we start maybe with a little bit of a mix of the two, because we want to add a shadow. And then kind of build up color. So we want to, this is where I said we're not done yet. We can come back and we want to add some shadows to this. And we're going to add in shadows where it makes sense, like underneath this area where all of her clothing is. This is going to be darker. So I'm going to use a little bit of that brown liner, and I'm just going to brush it over the top. And the nice thing about shading with washes is that it doesn't get rid of all the work that we did with the dry brushing. It just colors it. So then where we want to go, maybe suggest some rust in between the links, that's where we're going to grab it. I'm going to grab a finer brush, actually. Grab a finer brush, grab your wash, because you can put it on a little bit more precisely. And put that in. And if you decide you really want to suggest she's been out in the field for a long time, or you're working on some undead with some really rusty chainmail, then put it also where, like, if there's a belt, like, cinching the chainmail, put it right above the belt. Because there's going to be, like, dirt and grime that's rubbed in between the links all around that belt. So you want to get that wicked color in there. Likewise, wherever it disappears, like, over here into the belt. See how adding those shadows brings out the details a little bit better, right? And then we can continue if we really want to go all in with that. You can also start with the brown, and say you decided, oh no, I really don't want to go for that. I want to kind of back out of that brown. The answer is not to paint black over it, but to paint blue over it. Since brown is just orange with black in it, they are just complementary colors. So they can kind of cancel each other out. So I've got some blue liner mixed up in a wash. If I decide that I don't want that brown stain right there up under there, I'm just going to put blue over the top. And what that's going to turn into is much more of a gray. It's going to wash out that warm brown tone. It might take a couple of applications, but it's totally doable. And anywhere else that you decide, like there's kind of a dip here where her rib cage is, you can kind of see that shadow fall. I could choose to just paint that in. when you are working on something like a loincloth where you've got like a big fold and it's kind of recessed, goes kind of in waves, this is how you're going to do it. You're just going to paint a shadow where there would be a shadow, and then the parts of the loincloth that are sticking out, the tops of the folds, you're going to leave those silver, or you're going to bring them up even farther with something like a pearl white. So what you want to do really is paint the chainmail like it's cloth. Start out by painting it like it's cloth, and then come back and, you know, pick up your little details where you decide you'd like them. And if you really want a little bit more dark here, you can grab some of that black wash we used up here and use that as well. Washes are just a great way to shade metallics in general. But I notice I'm not putting the wash over the whole thing except up here. And instead I'm targeting it. I'm painting it exactly where I want it, in the shadows for the most part. So now we've got our top. And we can see where we've got our black. We see where we might want to pick out some details, but I'm not going to do that yet. I'm actually going to add in more shading. So see how she's got kind of the muscle here? Like you can kind of see see that shadow that comes in right there and that shadow that comes in right there. That's going to be your shoulder muscle, right? Because she's pretty built. She's got decent musculature up here, although I haven't painted her six pack. So let's just, since we're in shading, let's keep shading. So I'm going to use my blue for this one. And I'm going to actually apply more washes toward the back and back side of the arm. So again, we're painting this like cloth, right? So where it starts to disappear into her coat, she's going to lose it there. I'm going to kind of look here. I think my shadow goes there and there. And I'm just going to use this wash, again, just painting it. See that subtle effect there? But then now you can see the muscle, can't you? Right? You can see kind of the bulge of the shoulder, the bone and the muscle. And then you can see where the chainmail is kind of wrapping around it. And then again, down here where it's going to go up against her arm, you're going to get darker. You can grab some blue liner or even some black wash. And put that in. The light's mostly going to be falling on the upper side of the arm here. So, and you can continue, depending on how dramatic you want this effect. The great thing about this is you just keep building up washes. And you're not going to lose, as you can see, we still have our detail that we put on with our initial layer. We haven't lost it. It would take a lot of washes. You would eventually lose it if you keep doing a lot of washes and you don't put another highlight on. So you may decide if you start losing it to do a little bit of dry brush and then start at it again. And the great thing about this is that you can go back and forth a lot. Like even 28mm chainmail is usually pretty clunky and not real fine. So you could go back and forth a lot and not lose detail. So, all right, so we've got our nice little thing down here and a nice thing up here. We can see that they're very similar, right? They're very, very similar. They give you very similar results. You can probably see the links a little bit better down here. But this is more, frankly, this is more realistic. Because actually Rhonda Bender, Bird with a Brush, for those who want to go check out her blog, she actually talked about this. It was one of the things, I think, you can't do that in mini painting PDF. I think it was in part 1, where she talks about how chainmail, when you view it at a distance, really just looks like sparkly cloth. You can't see all the individual rings. So when you come down to it, although this might please us a lot more because you can see the fine detail, this is more of a realistic look. Well, we are going to come in and we are going to do a little bit of a highlight there. So let's go ahead, do a little side brush here. I don't want this video to last forever. But so this is where you would use this technique then after you paint the folds on, say, a chainmail loincloth. You want to shade in between the folds, and then the tops of the folds, you're going to come along with your... my brush got a little wet. Okay, so when you are doing a side brushing technique, it is really important to get your brush really, really dry. As dry as you can. So with me, I dipped it in the water because that's habitual. It's really habitual for me to keep some water in my brush. But here, that works against me. So I'm going to kind of paint it over my skin to make sure I've got a good amount of paint on the bristles. And then we're going to come along and just kind of brush the top here. Because the top is where the light's going to fall on that shoulder, right? So we're going to bring that part up. See how that's coming up brighter now. And we can continue to just kind of bring it up and layer up more and more of that. You want a light touch. But again, you don't have to do the whole dry brush. You don't have to do that uncontrolled dry brush. You can do this in a very controlled manner and still keep good detail. And then we've got this area here, a little bit of that back here. I want to get the biceps, the start of the biceps there, right? Think about what's underneath this stuff and suggest shapes. When it looks flat, it doesn't have to be flat. You can suggest the shapes that are under that, just with a little bit of brushwork. All right, so that's coming up actually really nicely. Look how that looks. That's fantastic. So let's use some pearl white and see if we can get that to go up again. And we're also going to use our pearl white down here on the hip, to bring up our highlights a little bit more. So pearl white is a white metallic that Reaper Miniatures makes. It's 9100. It is the great highlighting color for almost all metallics that Reaper makes. You can even use it mixed into gold to make a lighter gold to pop your highlights on your golds and your brasses. So it is a really, really useful color. Be sure to pick some up, especially if you're doing anything like our blue metallic or our purple metallic. You can mix this directly in to make a lighter blue or a lighter purple metallic for highlights. So I cleaned off my brush as much as I could. And let's see if I can get this to go nicely. Again, we're going to kind of brush it over the top of the skin, just a couple of goes. And when I know I've got fairly little, I can bring that in for a very bright white highlight there. See it? Look at how high that is now. So you only want to use this highlight where you know there's going to be a lot of light, punchy light. So like there on the bicep, I want that to bring it out. So I brought it there, and I brought in a little bit on the tricep back here. If you feel like you go overboard with it and you've got too much white and you've lost your dark, then you can go and get your other metallic. That works just great. So this is coming off much more as cloth, but it is still looking convincing. Down here, we would use this on this point of the hip here to bring that up. See how much brighter that looks now compared to the other areas around it. So you see, you can shade and highlight metallics just like you shade and highlight anything, and you should, to make it look right. So this is some of the easier, like I said, chainmail is one of the easiest things that you can do with metallic paint, because it usually has a lot of texture, so it's very easy to bring out details. I'm going to bring up this one fold just with a couple of light touches. And again, I've got very little paint on my brush, so it's not fighting me and not popping out too much. So once again, you would use, if you were doing like a normal 28mm, you would use this white like at the very edges, like the tops, the very tops of the folds, right? You can see how that shows up. And I'm going to hit the belly a little bit down here because her abs would come out a little. There we go. So here again, you can see the anatomy beneath it, right? So you've got the rib cage coming down here. You've got kind of the shadow around the abs. You've got the swell of the belly here, and you've got the hip here. You can see the anatomy. And up here, you can see your shoulder bone and muscle and the bicep muscle here and a little bit of the tricep back here. So you've got, it's not just flat, right? It's actually interesting. And that is pretty much how I do it. If we wanted to go a little bit more rusty, you could take 9072 Rust Brown and work it, do a mix with your Russet Brown first. That's 91.99 by the way, for this dirty color. And then kind of like speckle it into here. You could even put it down in between the links if you wanted to get real precise with it. Or you can just put little specks of it. Just stipple it. Stipple it into where you put the brown. So if you're doing a skeleton chainmail, like loincloth, like do the brown in the creases. And then like take some of that rust red, that 9072, and just kind of speckle it in there, especially up right under the belts or some like where plates are overlapping and stuff like that. That'll end up looking like rusted chainmail. All right, everybody, there we go. That is pretty much, it really is the easiest thing to do. The answer is to paint it like cloth and then use the side of your brush to bring out some little details, some highlights. Make sure if you're working on a 28mm sculpted piece and you want to, like with that white at the end, you can kind of just do a dry brush just to pick out a few of the links, because usually the links are sculpted really big on 28mm chainmail because they're trying to convey information, so it's not sculpted as tiny as it would be in real life, unless you're doing a Tom Meyer model. Then he's crazy, that guy. But yeah, so there you go, everybody, and that's the really easy like way to do metallic chainmail. It looks so nice, and I could just keep working on it. I could pick out individual links with a finer brush. I could even add a little more white to my pearl white if I wanted to. I could add some gloss sealer in spots to really pick up the shine, so that when the light hit it in the regular environment, those spots would pop, right? You could do all of that. So, all right. Thank you all. I hope you had fun on this one. I realized I hadn't done a shade of metallics for steel, so I wanted to get some of that in. And people have asked for chainmail for a while, both on stream and off. So, okay, have a great day, and we'll be back with your $5 PDF this month in a few days. Thank you much, and this is Anne signing off.